In 1962, Herb Alpert was broke, recording music in his garage, and about to make the riskiest move of his life. Today, he's worth nearly $1 billion. The shocking part is, it all started with $200 and a sound he discovered by accident. From outselling the Beatles to building an empire, this is the untold story of how one musician's wild gamble paid off bigger than anyone imagined. Herb Alpert's story begins in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, where he was born on March 31, 1935. His parents, Louis and Tilly Alpert, were Jewish immigrants. His father from Ukraine, his mother from Romania. They had left behind difficult lives in Eastern Europe, searching for better opportunities in America. Their new home was modest, but it was filled with music. Louis worked as a tailor, yet his true passion was the mandolin. He played by ear, often improvising melodies. Tilly, on the other hand, was a trained violinist. She believed in discipline, in structure, in the power of practice. Music wasn't just entertainment in their home, it was a way of life. This was the world Herb grew up in. The Great Depression made life harder, but it never silenced their passion. Despite financial struggles, the Alperts made sure their children had access to music lessons. Herb wasn't the only musically gifted one in the family. His older brother David played drums. His sister, Mimi, mastered the piano. Their home was like a small orchestra. The three of them played together, experimenting, learning, shaping each other's skills without even realizing it. But Herb was different. He was quiet, shy, often struggling to express himself. Words didn't come easily, but music did. When he was 8 years old, something happened that changed his life forever. A music appreciation class at Melrose Elementary introduced him to the trumpet. The moment he held it, something clicked. It was more than just an instrument. It was a voice, his voice. Learning to play wasn't easy. The trumpet demanded breath, strength, and control. His first lessons were frustrating, and his early practice sessions were far from pleasant to those around him. Neighbors complained about the noise. His mother had a different reaction. She told him to play louder. She wasn't just defending him. She was encouraging him to own his sound, to embrace it. By the time he was a teenager, Herb was performing at local dances. These gigs weren't just about making money. They were his first real lessons in live performance. He learned how to read a crowd, how to play with energy, how to adapt. At the same time, he became fascinated with recording. He got his hands on a wire recorder and started experimenting. At Fairfax High School, he took music seriously. He wasn't just playing, he was experimenting. But music wasn't his only focus. He was also on the gymnastics team, specializing in the rings. That ended when an emergency appendectomy sidelined him. With sports off the table, he threw himself into music. After graduating in 1953, he enrolled at the University of Southern California to study music. He played in the Trojan Marching Band, refining his skills. But his time at USC didn't last long. In 1954, the U.S. Army drafted him during the Korean War. Instead of heading to combat, he was stationed at the Presidio in San Francisco, playing in the 6th Army Band. This experience pushed him to find his own voice as a musician. He later said that being around so many talented players forced him to innovate. When he returned to Los Angeles in 1957, he considered acting but soon realized his passion was still in music. He started working behind the scenes, teaming up with lyricist Rob Wirtz. Together, they wrote and produced songs, and in 1959, they had their first major success. Baby Talk, recorded by surf rock duo Jan and Dean, hit number 10 on the Billboard charts. That success led to another partnership, this time with songwriter Lou Adler. The two wrote songs for Keane Records artists, including Sam Cooke. In 1959, they co-wrote Wonderful World, which Cooke recorded and released the following year. He altered some of the lyrics, adding a school-themed twist that resonated with listeners. The song became a major hit, reaching number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 2 on the R&B chart. Over time, it became one of Cooke's most beloved recordings, covered by countless artists. Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss met in 1961, a moment that set the stage for one of the most successful independent record labels in history. Moss, born in the Bronx on May 8, 1935, had studied English at Brooklyn College before diving into the music business as a promoter. He moved to Los Angeles in 1960, looking for opportunities in the growing industry. Alpert, born on March 31, 1935, in Los Angeles, had already made a name for himself as a musician and songwriter. He co-wrote Wonderful World for Sam Cooke and was known for his trumpet playing. Their paths crossed when Moss asked Alpert to play on a track called Love Is Back in Style. That meeting led to something bigger than either of them could have predicted. In 1962, they took a leap of faith and started their own label. With just $100 each, they launched Carnival Records. Their first release was Tell It to the Birds, credited to Dor Alpert, a name Herb used early in his career. The song gained some attention and was sold to Dot Records for $750. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. Then they ran into a problem. Another company was already using the name Carnival Records. They needed something new. They decided on A&M Records, using the first letters of their last names. It was simple, but it worked. The early days were far from glamorous. They ran A&M out of Alpert's garage in West Hollywood with nothing more than a desk, a piano, and 2 phone lines. They handled everything themselves, from recording to distribution. Then came The Lonely Bull. Alpert got the idea after watching a bullfight in Tijuana. He wanted to capture that energy in a song. Using layered trumpets and adding sound effects of a cheering crowd, he created something unique. When the single was released in August 1962, it took off. It climbed to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and sold over 700,000 copies. For an independent label operating out of a garage, this was massive. With a hit on their hands, Alpert and Moss pushed forward. Later that year, Alpert released his first album, The Lonely Bull. The success of the title track helped the album sell well, proving that A&M could compete with major labels. They didn't stop there. They signed new artists like Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66 and the Baja Marimba Band, expanding their roster beyond just Alpert's music. One thing set A&M apart from other labels. They gave artists creative freedom. While big record companies focused on making hits fast, A&M trusted musicians to experiment and find their own sound. This approach attracted a diverse range of artists. Jazz legend Quincy Jones, soft rock duo The Carpenters, and many others found a home at A&M. By 1966, A&M had outgrown its garage headquarters. They moved into the historic Charlie Chaplin Studios in Hollywood, a sign of how far they had come in just a few years. But even as they grew, the foundation of the company stayed the same. Alpert handled the creative side. Moss took care of business. Their partnership was built on trust, and they never let go of that. For nearly 3 decades, A&M remained one of the most respected independent labels in the world. They signed legendary artists, released groundbreaking music, and built a reputation for putting artists first. When they sold the company in 1989 for $500 million, they had already changed the music industry forever. Herb Alpert's signature sound didn't come from a recording studio or a music theory book. It came from something far more unexpected: a bullfight in Tijuana. In the early 1960s, he and his business partner Jerry Moss took regular trips to Mexico. The energy of the crowds, the spectacle of the fights, and most of all, the sound of the brass bands made a deep impression on him. These weren't just background music. They were part of the drama, blasting triumphant fanfares as matadors stepped into the ring. The intensity of it all stuck with him. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1962, Alpert attended a bullfight featuring Carlos Arusa, one of Mexico's most famous matadors. That day, the band was led by Miguel Bravo, a musician with ties to Rafael Mendez, one of the country's greatest trumpet players. Alpert didn't just hear the music, he felt it. The sharp blasts of the trumpets, the rhythm of the drums, the way the sound electrified the audience. It wasn't just about the spectacle in the arena. It was about the atmosphere the music created. That feeling followed him back to Los Angeles, where he found himself thinking about how to capture it. Around the same time, songwriter Saul Lake had given him a tune called Twinkle Star. It had potential, but Alpert knew it needed something more. Inspired by what he had heard in Tijuana, he reworked it completely. He overdubbed his trumpet to create the full, layered sound of a mariachi brass band. He added crowd noise to give it the energy of a live event. When it was finished, it didn't sound like anything else on American radio. He renamed it The Lonely Bull. Released in 1962, the song became an instant hit, climbing into the Billboard Top 10. It was a turning point, not just for Alpert, but for American pop music. The Lonely Bull introduced millions of listeners to a sound that blended traditional mariachi with jazz and pop influences. The success of the song also set the stage for something even bigger: A&M Records. This was the very first release on the label that Alpert and Moss had just founded. Within weeks, the Lonely Bull album sold over 1 million copies. The most remarkable part? Much of it was recorded in Alpert's garage. He didn't have a full band at the time, so he used what he had, himself. He layered his trumpet over and over, creating the illusion of a large brass section. The final recordings were polished at Conway Recording Studios in Hollywood, with help from the legendary Wrecking Crew. The result was a completely new sound, something fresh yet familiar. Alpert had found his formula, and over the next few years, the hits kept coming. In 1965, Going Places delivered 2 of the group's most recognizable songs. Tijuana Taxi had a playful energy, with its signature horn blasts mimicking the honk of a car. Spanish Flea, written by Julius Wechter, became so popular it was later used as the theme for The Dating Game. That same year, Whipped Cream and Other Delights cemented their status as one of the biggest acts in the world. Released in 1965, it took over the charts, selling over 6 million copies in the US alone. It spent 8 weeks at #1 on the Billboard album chart and stayed in the top 40 for an unbelievable 141 weeks. For 61 of those weeks, it was in the top 10. That kind of success was rare. At one point in 1966, Alpert's sales even rivaled the Beatles and Frank Sinatra. The cover became just as famous as the music. It featured model Dolores Erickson draped in what looked like whipped cream, though it was actually shaving cream. Real whipped cream would have melted under the hot studio lights. The image was bold, suggestive, and impossible to forget. Erickson was 3 months pregnant during the shoot, a detail that added an unexpected twist to its legacy. Decades later, the cover remains one of the most iconic in music history, inspiring countless parodies and tributes. Musically, the album defined Alpert's signature sound. His Tijuana brass blended Latin rhythms with pop melodies, creating hits like A Taste of Honey and Whipped Cream. These tracks became more than just radio favorites. They were everywhere. The dating game used them as background music, and they appeared in commercials, TV shows, and films. The album's success proved that instrumental music could dominate mainstream charts, something few artists had achieved. That same success carried over to the Grammys. In 1966, A Taste of Honey won Record of the Year, an almost unheard-of achievement for an instrumental track. It was a defining moment in Alpert's career. Over the years, he collected 9 Grammy Awards, proving his influence across multiple decades. In 1979, he embraced a new sound with Rise, a smooth jazz-funk instrumental that became another massive hit. It won Best Pop Instrumental Performance and introduced Alpert to a younger audience. Even in the 2010s, his music was still earning recognition. In 2014, his album Steppin' Out won Best Pop Instrumental Album. And in 2007, he received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, cementing his place as one of music's greats. But commercial success was where Alpert truly shocked the industry. In 1966, at the height of Beatlemania, he did something that seemed impossible. He outsold the Beatles on the Billboard charts. At one point, he had 4 albums in the top 10 and 5 in the top 20, a record that wasn't matched until Taylor Swift did it decades later. That year, his Tijuana Brass sold over 13 million records. While the Beatles were reinventing rock, Alpert was delivering something entirely different. His music wasn't about rebellion. It was about melody, rhythm, and pure fun. It appealed to all ages, from young listeners to older generations who weren't as drawn to the rock revolution. Then came another surprise. In 1968, Alpert, known almost exclusively as an instrumentalist, stepped in front of the microphone. The result was This Guy's in Love with You, written by Burt Bacharach and Hal David. It was never meant to be a hit. He performed it casually in his CBS television special, The Beat of the Brass, singing the song as a personal serenade to his then-wife, Sharon May Lubin. But after the broadcast, CBS was overwhelmed with requests to release it as a single. The response was immediate. The song shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 by June 22, 1968, holding the top spot for 4 weeks. It also reached #1 in Canada and Australia. That success made Alpert the first artist ever to have both a #1 vocal hit, This Guy's in Love with You, and a #1 instrumental hit, Rise. His ability to transition from instrumental music to singing proved his versatility in a way no one had expected. Herb Alpert met Lonnie Hall in 1966, and that moment shaped both their careers and their lives. Alpert was already a star. He was leading the Tijuana Brass and co-founded A&M Records. Hall had just joined Sergio Mendes's Brazil 66, stepping in as the new lead singer. Their meeting happened when Alpert signed the band to his label. Hall's voice became a signature part of their sound, with hits like Mas Que Nada and The Fool on the Hill making waves. From the start, there was a spark. Alpert was drawn to her voice, but there was something else about her, something beyond music. They kept crossing paths, working together on different projects. By 1973, they were ready to take the next step. But they didn't just get married once. They had 3 ceremonies. First, a private one. Then, a ceremony with a rabbi. Finally, a priest married them in Hawaii. It was an unusual start, but it reflected something true about them. Their marriage has lasted over 5 decades, something rare in music, and even rarer in Hollywood. They have 1 daughter together, Aria, born in 1976. She followed a creative path of her own, becoming an actress. Alpert's creativity doesn't stop with music. He's also an accomplished painter and sculptor. His art, like his jazz, is spontaneous and driven by instinct. His Spirit Totem series, inspired by indigenous totem poles, features towering bronze sculptures. Some reach up to 18 feet tall. He describes them as frozen smoke, a perfect reflection of their fluid movement. His paintings, full of bold colors and abstract forms, have been exhibited across the U.S. and internationally. Some have even become part of permanent collections in major museums. For Alpert, art and music are the same at their core. Both come from feeling, from capturing something in the moment. His exhibitions have been held in galleries around the world. In 2023, Heather James Fine Art hosted Whispered Conversations, a collection he created during the pandemic. The name came from how the pieces seemed to whisper to each other. It was a deeply personal project, reflecting a time of introspection. But Alpert's creative reach goes even further. He has also been involved in Broadway. In 1993, he co-produced Angels in America, Tony Kushner's groundbreaking Pulitzer Prize-winning play. He also backed Jelly's Last Jam, a musical about jazz legend Jelly Roll Morton. Other projects included Seven Guitars and The Boy from Oz, a musical based on Peter Allen's life. By 1966, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass were outselling the Beatles. Their albums dominated the charts, their songs played everywhere, and Alpert himself had become a star. But just a few years later, he made a decision no one saw coming. He walked away. The constant pressure to perform, record, and tour had drained him. At one point, he even said, "The trumpet is my enemy." Alpert needed to find his way back. He stopped performing and focused on understanding what music really meant to him. During this time, he studied with Carmine Caruso, a trumpet teacher who had never even played the instrument himself. But Caruso's lessons weren't about playing notes. They were about control, emotion, and reconnecting with the music. Alpert later realized the real instrument wasn't his trumpet. It was him, his emotions, his passion. But the music industry had moved on. By the late 1970s, instrumental pop wasn't selling like before. Alpert tried keeping up, even experimenting with a disco version of Tijuana Brass hits. But he hated how it sounded and scrapped the entire project. His style felt outdated. He needed something new. Then, in 1979, everything changed. His nephew, Randy Badaz Alpert, and producer Andy Armour came up with a song called Rise. It was originally a fast disco track, but they slowed it down to 100 beats per minute, giving it a smooth, hypnotic groove. That one change made all the difference. When Reese was released, it took off. It climbed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in October 1979, making Alpert the first artist to top the charts as both an instrumentalist and a vocalist. It won a Grammy, sold millions, and became even bigger when it was used in a major scene on General Hospital, one of the most watched soap operas at the time. Decades later, its impact lived on when the notorious B.I.G. sampled the bass line in Hypnotize, proving that Rise wasn't just a hit, it was timeless. With that success, Alpert proved he wasn't stuck in the past, but he wasn't done pushing boundaries. In 1987, he took another risk with Keep Your Eye on Me, an album that leaned into R&B and funk. To make it work, he teamed up with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, the same producers behind Janet Jackson's biggest hits. The result was a fresh, modern sound that still had Alpert's signature trumpet at its core. Songs like Diamonds and Making Love in the Rain featured vocals from Janet Jackson and Lisa Keith, helping him reach a younger audience. Some critics weren't sure what to make of this new style, but the album was a hit, getting heavy airplay on R&B stations. Alpert had done it again, reinvented himself without losing what made him unique. But Alpert's influence wasn't just in his own music. Behind the scenes, he had built one of the most powerful record labels of all time. In 1962, he and Jerry Moss started A&M Records in Alpert's garage with just $200 each. What began as a small operation soon became a major force in the industry. At first, the label focused on Alpert's own music, but as it grew, it signed artists like the Carpenters, Cat Stevens, and Joe Cocker. Later, it became home to the Police, Janet Jackson, and so many others. A&M had a reputation for giving artists creative freedom, something rare in the industry. That freedom led to legendary albums like Carole King's Tapestry and Peter Frampton's Frampton Comes Alive. But A&M wasn't afraid to take risks either. In 1977, they signed the Sex Pistols, a shocking move for a label known for polished, radio-friendly artists. It didn't last. The band was dropped just weeks later, but it showed that A&M wasn't afraid to push boundaries. By the late 80s, A&M was making over $300 million a year. Then, in 1989, Alpert and Moss made a huge decision. They sold the label to Polygram for around $500 million. It was a massive payday, but it also marked the end of an era. And things didn't go smoothly after the sale. Tensions grew between them and Polygram over creative control. Feeling pushed aside, Alpert and Moss sued for breach of contract in 1998 and won an additional $200 million settlement. Even after selling A&M, Alpert never stopped. He kept making music, exploring new sounds, and even shifting his focus to visual art. His career wasn't about following trends, it was about constantly evolving. Herb Alpert has spent over 6 decades shaping the sound of contemporary jazz. In September 2024, he hit a huge milestone, his 50th studio album, 50. The name isn't just about his music, it also marks 50 years of marriage to his wife, Grammy-winning vocalist Lani Hall. The album blends old and new, featuring covers like Corcovado, Baubles, Bangles, and Beads, and a fresh take on Elvis Presley's Are You Lonesome Tonight?, alongside originals like Dancing Down 50th Street and Morning Mist. Even after all these years, Alpert still knows how to make his music feel alive. 50 debuted at #1 on the Billboard Contemporary Jazz Albums chart, proving that his signature trumpet sound still connects with audiences. His career stats are staggering: 9 Grammy Awards, 15 gold albums, and more than 72 million records sold worldwide. And it's not just about performing. Back in 1962, he co-founded A&M Records, a label that would go on to launch legends like the Carpenters and Janet Jackson. March 31st, 2025 is set to be historic. Alpert turns 90, and he's celebrating in a big way, with a special concert at New York City's Jazz at Lincoln Center. This isn't just a birthday show, it's also a tribute to whipped cream and other delights turning 60. For the first time in over 40 years, he's reforming the Tijuana Brass with a new lineup. The concert is part of a larger U.S. tour, with stops in cities like Boston, Las Vegas, and Denver. Fans will get to hear the classics that made him famous, but with a fresh twist. Even at 90, Alpert refuses to slow down. He and Lani Hall continue to tour, blending jazz, Brazilian rhythms, and pop into performances that feel timeless. But his legacy isn't just in music. Through the Herb Alpert Foundation, which he started in 1988, he has donated over $200 million to arts education and social causes. His $30 million donation to UCLA created the Herb Alpert School of Music, and his $17 million gift to the Harlem School of the Arts transformed it into a leading creative institution. Alpert's success isn't just about music. He's built an empire through smart investments. He's an accomplished painter and sculptor, with his work featured in galleries worldwide. His jazz club and restaurant, Vibrato Grill and Jazz in Bel Air, remains a key part of LA's live music scene. Real estate has also played a huge role in his fortune, with properties that have grown in value over the years. With an estimated net worth between $850 million and $900 million, Herb Alpert is one of the richest musicians in history. His fortune comes from music royalties, the sale of A&M Records, a $400 million deal for Rondor Music Publishing, real estate investments, and licensing deals. But his story isn't just about money. It's about passion, reinvention, and an unstoppable drive to create.